In this video, I will be discussing genetic atrial fibrillation. Atrial fibrillation is the most common heart rhythm disorder, affecting 350,000 Canadians. There exist a number of different risk factors for the development of atrial fibrillation. These include age, diabetes, high blood pressure, along with heart disease. However, only 50% of cases that are seen, these known risk factors are present. And it is these cases where no risk factors are found that have led to the study that there may be a genetic component to atrial fibrillation. A number of genes have been identified in families and populations that are involved in the development of atrial fibrillation. These include genes involved in heart development, genes involved in the structure of the heart, as well as genes involved in the ion channels within the heart itself. As an example, we will show a family. So we have a mother and a father, and the mother develops atrial fibrillation at age 53, and she also has diabetes. The father does not have atrial fibrillation. They then go on to have children. They have one child that shows atrial fibrillation, diagnosed at age 40 with no risk factors. Another child with atrial fibrillation diagnosed at age 67 with diabetes. Another child is diagnosed with AF at age 50 with hypertension or high blood pressure. And finally, they have another child that does not have atrial fibrillation. So, why do we have these differences in when atrial fibrillation appears and having it with and without risk factors? So, an explanation for why this family shows atrial fibrillation diagnosed at different ages with different or no risk factors can be explained by what's called multifactorial inheritance. And what this means is that a combination of both genetic and environmental factors are involved in the development of atrial fibrillation. To help explain multifactorial inheritance, I will use two jars to depict two family members. So we will define as the red line here the height of the jar that once passed, the family member will develop atrial fibrillation. So in light blue, I will show marbles, and these marbles represent the amount of genetic factor that the family member has that predispose them to having atrial fibrillation. And in green, I will show environmental factors such as smoking, obesity, etc., that may lead to atrial fibrillation. And so what we can see is that the patient or family member on the right requires much less environmental factor to potentially develop atrial fibrillation. And this explains why some family members may develop atrial fibrillation quicker than others. So going back to the family, it has been found that they have a gene variant in their potassium channels. As we said earlier, the family was found with genetic testing to have a variation in the gene that encoded for potassium channels in the heart. So potassium channels are on the outside of heart cells, and they're important in the electrical system of the heart, and they pump potassium out of cells. Variations in potassium channels can lead to atrial fibrillation in one of two ways. These variations can lead to potassium channels that pump out much more potassium than is originally seen, and also variations can lead to potassium channels pumping out much less potassium than is normally seen. And it's important to know that both of these variations can lead to atrial fibrillation. Knowing which variation is present is important in potentially directing treatment. For example, there are medications called potassium channel blockers that block potassium from exiting potassium channels. This family was found to have a variation in potassium channels that leads to the potassium channels pumping out much less potassium than is normally seen. So it's important to know that they have this variation, as treating this family with a potassium channel blocker could potentially worsen their atrial fibrillation. So the goal of our current research is to understand the genetic factors that increase people's risk of developing atrial fibrillation. And ultimately, the goal is to use this information to help personalize treatment.